What's up, guys? First of all, thank you, Dr. Hanley, for allowing us to communicate in this way. I really like the videos from past classes. I'm really going to enjoy this. For this week's discussion post, it says, identify an Old Testament law that you found bizarre, disturbing, or even trivial. Why do you think God gave the Israelites this law, and in what manner do you think it applies to Christians today? The one that I found the most bizarre back in my heyday, right? Like the one that always stuck out to me, and the one that I found disturbing purely because I'm from Eastern Kentucky, is that in Leviticus 3, verse 17, it shall be a statute forever throughout your generations and all your dwelling places that you eat neither fat nor blood. This is talking about sacrifices and whatnot in context, but when I heard that, without knowing the context and whatnot, not being able to eat fat or blood tells me that I can't eat meat, or that I can't eat the fat on a ribeye, and that disturbed me, right? But looking at this verse in context, first of all, why do you think God gave the Israelites this law? It has, to me, it doesn't. I've heard a lot of explanations of like the fat being like unclean and all that stuff. But or like just not good for you or whatnot. I've heard a lot of explanations, but within this context, in verse 17, it says that you can't eat the fat nor blood. But in verse 16, the text says, which is right before it, and the priest shall burn them on the altar as a food offering with a pleasing aroma. All fat is the Lord's. And this is in context to talking about the fat that's on the entrails, that's all over the sacrifice, which is a goat in this case. But the line, all the fat is the Lord's. And looking through this verse and looking through this chapter, really God gave this verse so that, or God gave this statute so that they can be reminded that the best goes to God, right? Because the fat is the juiciest, most flavorful part of the meat or the part of the animal. So God goes into detail in showing what needs to be sacrificed and what needs to be burned on the altar and given to the Lord. And I think he gave it to the Israelites in law so that they can remember that the fat is the Lord's. The best is the Lord's. And this goes back to me. I think about the story of Cain and Abel, where obviously Abel gave the firstborn of his flock, and Cain gave his grain, right? So Cain, in context, it looks like Cain didn't give his best crop, right? But Abel gave his absolute best. The firstborn of the flock is always the best. So in that sense, we see that this statute is to remind the Israelites to always give the best to the Lord. You shouldn't withhold from him because it's his anyway, right? And the second part of our discussion is, and in what manner do you think it applies to Christians today? Obviously we can't half-heart things. Part of our reading this week and part of the videos this week, especially in the 10 words to live by section that we went through, there's a difference in being, the thing that stuck out to me, and I'm going to write about this too, is a difference in being lawful and lawless, right? What was it? It was, lawful, lawless, or being legalistic. So there's a difference in being legalistic and lawful, right? Like following the statutes in Leviticus or following the statutes of the Ten Commandments, just so you can say that you've checkboxed it, is legalism, which is what Dr. Hanley explained in our videos, that's not right. That's being legalistic. That's not having the true heart. That's why the Pharisees were Pharisees, right? In the context that we would say that they're hypocrites, is that the word is not written on their hearts, but being lawful, the word is on your heart, right? And so, in what manner does this apply to Christians today? To remember that we should be pursuing the Lord with all of our heart, have the word written on our heart, remember that it comes from within, as Dr. Hanley said, and it's not that we see the statutes or we see the check boxes and say, oh, hey, I did that, I did that, I did that. It's not an external thing trying to change us. It's the internal change and our actions that come from it. So from this verse, to remember that the Lord deserves our best is what I see. So to answer just some of the questions, as Dr. Hanley wrote, you might reference Wright's questions for deriving principles on page 5 of the article for this week. I thought a couple of these were pretty good for this example. In what situation made this law necessary or desirable? And let's see, what kind of person would benefit from this law by assistance or protection? What change in society would this law achieve if it were followed? What kind of situation was this law intended to promote or prevent? It isn't intended to promote being wholehearted. It was intended to show, to remind the Israelites again, they needed to be all in, right, for God, and they needed to give the best to Him. And it is to prevent, obviously, them being like Cain and only, just checkboxing, being legalistic. Obviously, that's why it's necessary for one of those questions, and it assists the Israelites in remembering that they need to be wholehearted in this, and that they remember the best go to the Lord because of what He's done for them, and for Him bringing them out of Egypt, and for saving them, and for them becoming His people. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to Matt's post. Looking forward to your all's responses to this. Please let me know if you have anything that I've said that you'd like to comment on, obviously, or if there's any questions, or if I've said something wrong, or if you disagree. I'd really love to have an actual conversation about this. But thank you, guys.